Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. So first of all, thanks everyone for joining. This is community learning number 5 at Landa Club. Uh, Basically, this is a space where our members, our experts get to display their expertise, right? They can talk about their different specialties, and it's a chance for other members to learn and get some insight and perspective from others. So today we're hosting 3 public affairs experts. We have Rodrigo García, we have Sigfried Eisenmeier, and José Trejo. We're super thrilled because it's the first time we have a community learning which 3 members have prepared together. So I think that's it from my side. I don't want to talk too long. I'll let you guys introduce yourself and we can get started.
Hi everyone, I'm Rodrigo Garcia. I have 12 plus years of experience on tech policy, communications, team management, crisis management. That's basically my expertise.
Hey guys, this is Sigfried. Nice to meet you. Thanks for your interest, for your time, and for joining the session. I have experience also in government affairs, public policy, and in international development sector also. And in general, I focus on the impact that tech has on the society. Over to you, Jose.
Thank you, Sig. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here and joining us. My name is José Trejo, and I have over 10 years of experience in different issues regarding public affairs, particularly on policy advocacy and regulatory affairs. Thank you again for being here with us.
All right, so today it's going to be quite simple. We have 4 topics. What is public affairs? Then we're going to jump on case studies. Sig is going to talk about the toolkit, and finally we'll have some time for Q&A. Without further ado, we want to start with this. We are not here to sound the alarm, but at the end of the day, we want to mention that there's on your journey, on your founder's journey, you're going to find regulatory risks, and it's not an if, it's a when, right? At what point will they come? Because they're coming. And we want to open talk with this idea, the idea of the next slide, that is about the exponential gap. I'm not going to read aloud this quote that is from a startup investor and an advisor. I'll let you do that for yourself. But basically, this idea of exponential gap talks a little bit about this mutual incomprehension that exists between producers of technology and everyone else, right? Everyone else being your family, your friends that are not related to tech, but also policymakers, decision makers, powerful people that could decide if your startup lives another day. That's basically the people that is on the everyone else, and we are here as public policy experts, public affairs experts, to trying to close that gap, that exponential gap between the doers and the rest of the world, right? So yeah, go Pepe.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Well, we would like to start this this deep dive on public affairs by asking you, like everyone who's joining us today, on what comes into mind when we talk about public affairs, right? Maybe we, at some point or another in our professional lives, either inside of an organization or maybe when we are pushing or trying to make ourselves as a startup, have heard about public affairs or policy or whichever term that we are going to have a little bit of exploring in the next slide. But before that, we would like to hear you if you have any concept or word that comes to mind when we talk about public affairs. Anyone that could share with us your insights?
I think on the poll already we have
Oh, sure.
5 votes, 2 for policy right now, 1 corporate affairs, 1 regulatory affairs, and 1 public affairs. So all over, I think there's no consensus right now.
Yeah, I think that's quite normal when we deal with these issues, because maybe ourselves as people that have deal with this, maybe our experience has gone throughout different trenches and what we do, and maybe at some place they call us, hey, you're a public affairs expert, or you're a public affairs guy, and then we have the government relations, and then policy, or corporate affairs, or external affairs, or regulatory affairs. Like, at the beginning, we might think about these terms as an interchangeable terms. They're not so, but it is like kind of a junction between a common areas between every concept. These common areas share what Rodrigo said, is when those technology clashes with the regulatory and the public interests, and how both worlds start talking to each other, how the interest of our startup, or the interest of ours, is going to come and erode the regulatory or the public sphere. And then we look at the different functions within different industries that have slightly differences, but has the same the same goal, like defending our interest regarding the public, within the public sphere. So we have public affairs, that is kind of an umbrella concept. We have government relations that deal specifically with authorities and public officials. Then policy, when we think about means of influencing public policy. Corporate affairs, when you think about like more robust way of thinking, and throwing into the into the question sustainability, ethics, corporate social responsibility, among others. And then you think the stakeholders outside and inside the organization. External affairs, when you think about media, community groups, organizations, like only like the external stakeholders. And when you think about regulatory affairs, maybe you think a little bit more regarding laws and regulations, and how to get the compliance done, and the relationship with regulators. So I think this is a plethora of concepts, all of which have the specificities. But the idea that we want to convey you is that in either case, the goal is how to defend our interest to the outside world, and how can we position it and make the best out of them. Then when we think about how to share with you our experience, we did this this exercise on thinking about two-axis analysis. When you think about in what stage does the startup, or our project is doing in an early stage, a middle stage, and late stage, then how is the environment treating us? Like, is it as a not regulated environment, some regulation, or highly, or we are facing a highly regulated environment? This is more like kind of we throw here our ideas. It is not meant to be like setting in stone. But for instance, if we think about pharma or fintech, we think about maybe some late startups living in a highly regulated environment. And then when we think about, Web 3.0 or generative AI, maybe we think about an early stage, projects living in a some regulated environment. And we have different stages and different regulations. But in either way, there are some challenges and there are some experiences that we want to portray to you, and we would like to share with you on how to deal in either case, and how those companies and sectors have dealt in these cases. So we're going next with the study cases presentation. And first, I give the first to you, Rodrigo.
Sure. Thanks, Pepe. Well, early stage startups, regulatory issues from day zero. Okay, so basically, I picked a couple of examples of industries here that are well known: ride hailing and micromobility. And why this? Because like for people that are kind of familiar with the companies, the ride-hailing companies, they know that they face regulators and challenges from the beginning, right? Why? Because operations involve public space. There is already like a very streamlined process to get public permits to operate in public space, and a lot of these business models pose challenges in terms of externalities to society, right? Additionally, the business model threatens legacy industries. That's why like the disruption of ride hailing and micromobility was so big, and at the same time impacted not only in City Hall but in incumbents that from the beginning of the operations of these companies, they felt the impact, the negative impact on their pockets, right? And the other thing about these two industries is that the issues have constantly evolved, right? From the beginning, we started with public safety. We heard about a couple of cases of people that were robbed, or women were like harassed, or things like that, and that raised concerns among regulators. But like right now, that's not the main issue in terms of ride hailing, because those things were solved with technology and some processes. Now the issues or the challenges are on the labor laws and temporary workers and privacy, right? And because of this, I want to talk a little bit about the main takeaways of these two industries and their cases. And like we in purpose are not talking about companies but industries. But the case of Uber was so significant for the people who work on public affairs, that for those in this space, we call it the Uber model, which like was, let's launch first, and then we will have a face off with regulators, right? And that's what happened, and that's basically how this specific type of doing things, this playbook, was very successful at the beginning, but now it's ruined for forever, right? Because I personally worked on micromobility, and we knew from the beginning that we couldn't do this anymore, right? Because regulators, public servants know the playbook very well, and it's not going to take them by surprise again. So, but like I wanted to include this very specific example, because it's, if you are successful or so successful in your strategy, they can even name the way of things you did, right? Or how you solve your regulatory issues. The other key takeaway of this industry, these two industries are, you need to be aware of who are your foes, right? It's not only regulators, not only people in City Hall or in like in Congress. You have a lot of enemies, or at least people that are rooting you to fail, right? Because you are actually going against their interests, and usually these incumbents have very, very close relationships with people, with policymakers or regulators, and that could also pose a big challenge for you if you are trying to set a new way of do things, and being disruptive in your area, right? And also talking a little bit about the employment and labor issues that I was mentioning earlier, is that like you are a victim of your own success, in a way that you have created an issue that was not even a challenge before you came around, right? Now you put on the conversation these two specific set of new regulatory challenges, and you are actually like working around or going through finding a way to solve them, and that's definitely opens up a lot of revenue sources if you do it the right way, right? Because it's not only ride hailing, but that open up food delivery and things for these companies that they were not thinking when they launched at the beginning. And just Sig will talk a little bit about more of the toolkit, but some of the tactics that these companies use to solve the regulatory challenges from the beginning were grassroots campaigns or advocacy campaigns. Let the users do the heavy lift against regulators, PR and communications, lobbying to change some laws, government partnerships, and third-party partnerships. I think that's it from the early stage.
Great, thank you, Rodrigo. Now we're going to talk about a couple of companies, a sector which has been around already a little bit longer. The case we want to make here is about how those companies create disruption, and via disruption, positive impact is created, but also regulatory reaction. And the case we want to talk about are short-term rental platforms and urban development. And we know, right? We have seen it. We have used those platforms, those digital platforms that facilitate the booking and the usage of short-term rentals, and as a result, change the use how urban spaces are being used. And as I previously mentioned, this disruption creates many positive impacts, mainly economic impact for people who can rent certain spaces and generate income that way, but also in terms of tourism and the wider, more indirect economic impacts are quite important and broad. However, at the same time, there are also certain externalities that are being created by that disruption, such as, for example, higher prices for rents in certain areas, in certain city zones, which can then lead to phenomena like gentrification. And the question about gentrification directly also relates to a question like who should pay for what, and in that regard, the discussion about short rental platforms is also directly related to a fiscal question, and whether platforms need to pay local taxes, or whether platforms should have to withhold income taxes on the income which is being generated by the hosts who use digital platforms. So once certain public pressure grew, regulators started to react around the world to short-term rental platforms with regulation. And the most common one, the most basic one, is some kind of registration or some kind of licensing, where the government tries in a way to order or to somehow also control the number of platforms and spaces that are being rent. And a second question is about the taxes. What kind of local taxes should be paid by the digital platforms? What kind of income tax should be withheld from the hosts? And then in more extremer cases, you also see a limitation of supply, right? A maximum number of urban spaces that can be rented, or maybe the duration can be limited. Or even in certain zones, in certain areas, in specific cities, the usage of the operation of short-term rental platforms can be even forbidden in general. And some examples of those regulatory reactions are Spain, Netherlands, Germany, and also in France. If we go to the next slide in terms of the key takeaways, so those regulations, everything that relates to the use of urban spaces, of geography, It can vary within a country, right? The regulation between cities or between states can be different. So a subnational presence and subnational advocacy is important. And then in that case, also another important key takeaway is that policy ideas travel, right? Policymakers turn around, look around, and compare and get inspired by different public policies around the world. And one prominent example here is how Mexico currently is being inspired or has ambitions to replicate, copy certain regulations that have been implemented in Spain. The third one, context and timing matters a lot, both for the impact and for the regulatory reaction, right? In the case of the usage of short-term rental platforms, COVID-19 was crucial. And then, similar to the case Rodrigo presented, these dynamics get intensified by the market incumbents. Market incumbents have vested interests, in that case, the hotel industry. And of course, this can intensify those dynamics we have been talking about. What kind of tactics in terms of public policy, public affairs can be used or have been used by those companies? The one very classic one, a powerful one, is doing economic impact studies, putting a price tag, really measuring how much economic impact the platform generates in an economy. Oxford Economics is a very famous and well-known consultancy who does this very well. The advantage also of marketplace models is that you have quite big numbers of users, right? And you can use those users to do advocacy in favor of certain things. So that would be related to grassroots campaigns. And then what is always important is the third-party validation. It's always better if a legitimate actor talks about a company compared to that the company itself says, oh, I'm doing good. So doing partnerships with international organizations, NGOs, or the government itself can be extremely powerful to position the company in a strategic way. And then lastly, also community engagements are crucial to complement those strategies. Over to you, Jose.
Thank you, Zig. So last but not least, I would like to share with you what happened with late stage startups, where regulation is an obstacle to competition. And what we think of is regarding fintech world, where it is like no secret that fintechs live in a regulated space and in a complex ecosystem, because there are major players that up to now they are reluctant to change, because we are talking about money, we're talking about market power, and we're talking about how do innovation question the ways that has been doing banks or financial institutions for so long ago. So in this context where there's a regulated space, a complex ecosystem, major players reluctant to change, the rules for enabling fintech innovation, like fintech startups, are nascent. They are on the making in different stages. But either way, they need to be constantly pushed forward for a real change to happen, and for some new spaces to be created, and for startups to start taking more and more relevance within a given country or even in international scene. And here there's an example, like there's plenty of examples, but we choose the interoperability and integration of existing payment systems, and particularly the idea, for example, in Mexico, of clear houses for credit cards, where the two major players of these clear houses are owned by the major banks in Mexico. So when you think about these as the as the pipelines where the payment systems run, and when you think about the innovation coming, and when you think about like making things easier and open spaces for the bankerization of many people in Mexico, then you see there's deregulation and this reality as an obstacle, because the existing clear houses are owned by the major players, and they charge you a fee, whose that fee or that payment represent a barrier to competition for the fintech world, right? So these barriers of competition makes the entry of new fintechs or the increase of the growth of the existing ones to be more costly, right? And then this happens to slow down innovation. So this is how regulatory, issues and a complex ecosystem could turn against the competition in the startup world, in the fintech world. So what has been the solution of different, neobanks or fintechs that has been put in place? No other than competition and at the same time the collaboration with traditional financial institutions and government agencies that up to now has been very difficult to push forward. Thinking about disrupting the financial world in any given country is kind of difficult to imagine, but I think here is to bet on marginal changes to really take a stand and slowly start turning minds in government agencies and regulators for these material obstacles to start changing, and how do they start changing? Throughout modifying the existing rules or the existing regulatory world. Like the key takeaways is when you think about the key stakeholders, maybe you think about regulation, but you also have to think about customers and media. There is no other way that you can push the institutional political decision making as in previous cases if you don't put at the center the benefit that people, that customers really receive, and how could a potential different world could be seen. Then you have the comparative case studies, for instance, in Brazil, where the financial ecosystem is very different because it looks very different because of maybe regulators and decisions made by governments that have challenged these major players, these vested interests. But I think these comparative case studies gives you some hope of where the LATAM, for instance, is going in terms of the financial world. Some tactics you have to think about, not only how to push forward the interests of your own company, but rather how to do the industry work, because there's some battles that you can fight individually, but there's battles as big as these ones that you have to think about the industry works. Comprehensive work. Then you have to put down some studies that challenges the current state of regulation and the current state of matters. The partnership with key authorities, and this is very important because when you think about authorities, maybe you think about it like a black box, right? Authorities is written in capital letters, but when you do double click and then you see what authority means, then you see a different approaches to the same problem, and then you start seeing who in the government sector is your partner and who is thriving to change, and who institution and which person could be your ally for this to change. And you have to see and are willing to work with these key persons or key authorities. Also, it is very important in this case to show the community impact, because when you think about the fintech, or when you think about financial world and money and transactions, maybe you leave behind how this transaction benefit people's life, right? What does bancarization mean for the half of the Mexicans that do not have access to the financial system? And when you think about that, then you start making, or you start feeding the change of the regulation, because that change become relevant for not only for decision makers but for politicians, for instance, in moments that elections are coming or so. And then the last but not least, you have to think about the narrative on how you engage with these key stakeholders, and how you put the interest in front of you, and maybe start talking a lot more technical, and start speaking a lot more plain and simple words, and put in black and white what do you want and what are the benefits that you are trying to achieve. That's this case study regarding the financial sector with fintechs, and I will leave you with Sig to explain this next session. I think you're muted.
Here we go. Sorry. Great. Yeah. So now in the next slide, what we want to do is we want to get much more concrete to show you what is it that a public affairs person or public affairs team or public affairs consultant can actually do for you or for your company, for your organization. And let's imagine a matrix with two axes on the horizontal axis, we can see the benefit or the impact of certain tactics and strategies. And on the vertical axis, we can see what kind of effort or how much costs or also how much risk a certain action would imply. And the basics, the homework everyone needs to start with is really having a very clear risk analysis of your company, of the sector you are in, and also doing a very precise stakeholder mapping. So this is relatively easy to do. The impact is also relatively small, to be honest, because it's only the homework everyone needs to do. There are methodologies behind both activities. It's not something you do by chance, but it's relatively easy to do, but very, very important. The impact, though, is relatively small. If we then start to think about something a little bit more complex, we can start doing like internal policy studies, which also have an important component of explaining the business model. Many times, given that we disrupt certain sectors or given that we create new business models, the regulators don't really understand how, or they have little knowledge, let's say, about how a certain business model works. And hence, if the regulatory proposal is based on limited knowledge of that business model, that is counterproductive. So doing policy studies and explaining the business model can be something useful here. Also doing surveys, either to the public in general or to the users, can convey a message that the service or the product you offer is well received by the customers. And then, of course, in the next step, we have to think about how we communicate the outcomes and the results of those analyses. And there, on the one hand, you can think about op-eds or about blogs, but sometimes we might also want to communicate certain things in an unbranded way, right? Sometimes we might want to advocate in favor of something or against something without necessarily putting our name or putting our brand out there. So unbranded comms can also be something extremely important. Then the next one, which is something many government affairs public policy officials do quite a lot, is one-on-one engagement with decision makers. This is it's important, it's part of the job, but it's not limited to this, right? There's much more around this, and one meeting with one key decision makers won't get you the result you need. So this can only be part of a broader strategy. And a second one related to those engagement with this decision makers is also the help of preparing a bill of law, right? It could either be writing an entire or drafting an entirely new bill of law, or commenting on an existing proposal, right? In Spanish, we call it dice, debe decir, what it says and what it should say. This can be something very effective also, but it requires also certain technical knowledge, some time. That's why we put it a little bit higher up on the vertical axis. Then what follows are studies, industry level studies with third parties. This relates back to the case I shared previously. It's important that others talk about your company, about your organization, and that it's not only you talking about the company. And sometimes it can be very helpful to do those studies at industry level to measure the impact on financial inclusion, on the economy, on gender, etc. Another activity then is how to communicate again those results, right? It can be in conferences and webinars, and those activities help to position yourself also as a thought leader in that industry and in the debate about how to regulate a certain industry. What's the benefit of that? The benefit is that you will be consulted by the decision makers and by the legislators, and ideally your opinion will be taken into account. Another way how to communicate certain results or certain policy positions. Of course, also press releases or conferences. Those are very effective, very targeted communications. That's why we put them pretty on the right in this graph. Further activities then also our partnerships with third-party validators. These are not studies, but more like NGOs or projects or projects in collaboration with international organizations, which are important for the legitimacy that you can get via this collaboration. But it requires a lot of time to align or to work on that collaboration. If the third party, if the partner is not well selected, there can be public backlashes, etc. That's why we put it with a relatively high risk. And another one, more on the bottom, is the engagement with chambers and associations. This is also standard public affairs 101. Can be quite effective, but given that we move in innovative or new sectors, new industries, existing associations might not be the most effective way because maybe there is no association for a particular topic, or the association can also be dominated by big players who might have a different agenda. And that's why sometimes it can be necessary to create new industry associations. When it's well done, this can be very impactful, but it's also timely and costly. It costs real money to set up a new association. And the last two, high risk, high impact, are public campaigns and also grassroots advocacy. If it works out, if it's well done, extremely effective. But there's a lot of work behind it. If you really want to reduce the risk, and if you want to do it well, it requires a lot of effort. Yeah, so that's a little bit the toolkit or some of the activities and tactics we can do depending on certain objectives or depending on the situation a company is in. And I think we also have launched some questions, right, to get a little bit to get a sense of what do you think would be most useful for of those tools.
Yes, and again, I think the questions are the answers, sorry, are all over the place. There's one which is one-on-one engagement with decision makers, which has 2 votes. And I know we talked about this before, so maybe I'll just kick off the Q&A with a question for you guys. So you were mentioning that there are previous steps to talk with decision makers, right? So do you mind explaining some of the tactics or steps you build upon to actually get in front of a decision maker and what that conversation looks like?
Sure. So I think in order to know why we want to talk to a certain person, it's usually always about mitigating regulatory risks, right? That's why we have public affairs. The objective of public affairs is to mitigate regulatory or reputational risks and protect the company. So everything starts with a risk analysis and a hierarchy or a mapping of which risk is the most important one to mitigate. And once we have identified that risk, we then map the person who can help us or who is the most relevant person to mitigate that risk. And so the second step is the stakeholder map. And then the question gets a little bit more complex because we have to ask ourselves if we have direct access to that person or not, if that person will be or that stakeholder will be receptive to our ask, to our request or not. And if we first have to convince that person about our position or about the benefit of our company or industry, we then have to first do a whole set of activities in terms of studies, in terms of communication effort, etc., to build a little bit, to shape a little bit the public debate, and in order to make sure that once we sit down with that key decision maker, there is already certain understanding and maybe also certain sympathy for what we would be bringing to the table, or for what we would be asking for. Sorry for that. But of course, if it's only like about access and sitting down with that actor, the outcome, the most immediate outcome of that conversation might be more limited. Not sure if my colleagues want to compliment me here.
Yeah, I only want to add that there's also a question of what type of engagement you wanna create, because that could be like a formal engagement, or like a, like, let's have a meeting at your office or our offices, and we'll have an agenda, we'll go through a formal discussion. Or, if you have the possibility of having an informal engagement, and like the thing you want to discuss fits in that environment, that's also one of the things that you could try, of course, because like in a more relaxed environment, you could also get a little bit more out of the record, right? It's not like you're going to solve your regulatory issues at a conference, or having dinner or things like that, but you can get a little bit more of that exchange if the person, your the other party is open to it, right? So that's another thing that you have to keep in mind. Like maybe the forum, the environment is not the best for what you want to accomplish.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, guys. If we have any other questions, feel free to just open your mic and ask, or just leave the question in the chat. So I encourage you to do so.
I'm happy to jump in here. Thanks a lot for the chat, guys. I guess my question is more internal, like, and this is something that usually happens when there's a sharp regulatory environment for the startup. But internally, what are some of the best practices around communications you've seen between founders and their PA leads? Every X number of weeks you meet, do you loop them into any project that you want to launch? What are you seeing, tactically that works best on how to partner with this area, just internally? Go ahead, Jose.
I think there's, like, for me, there's two different like answers for that. First, we have to think about the PA area as an integral part of decision-making team, and as integral part of setting the company up and running, right? There's undebatable importance of the different organs of an organization, meaning finance, HR, or people, product, I don't know, whichever you want, legal, of course. But when you think about how the organization and decision making is built, you have to take into account this the PA from the beginning, right? Because I think it's when you do that, when leaders start thinking about this from the very beginning, then you are investing in preventing problems rather than investing on solving problems, right? And sometimes we become relevant when the problem is, the house is on fire, and then you call us and, hey, we have developed this this new tool, and then we went out, we went live, and then something happened, right? Please help us to solve this. So I think when you think about PA, you have to think about an integral part of the organization, and a part that can help making business grow, or refraining from business from going straight to the to the abyss. And then in terms of in the second part of the answer is I think being an integral part of an organization means hearing and maybe a periodical touch point, maybe weekly, for just to understand two things: which are the problems, like, and which are the solutions, but also for you to know how is the context going on, right? Maybe business people are always thinking about business, right? Business, and how to make organizations grow. But you have to make it stop. Like this touch point is to stop thinking about just business and take a look around to the forest and say, hey, we're dealing with this, with these trends, or this happened, the strike happened, and what does the strike mean for our business? This thing. So by doing that, and having these weekly touch points and just hearing about context, the decision making is much easier, right? And you take the full advantage of what BA can give the company.
And I think to complement on that last idea Jose shared, I think it's those efforts of bringing the outside world into the organization is also extremely important part of public affairs or external affairs. And once a company matures, you can find ways how to systematize the way we monitor both the public debate and the stakeholder feeling towards our company, right? We can start to measure and to monitor how certain public debate evolves, what the key themes are, whether they talk about us, whether they talk about the competitor, whether they talk about us positively or negatively. And then also there are ways how to measure your stakeholders, right? Are they favorable towards you or not so much? Do they give you endorsements, private endorsements, public endorsements? And once you are in a position to systematize all this and share those reports inside the organization, that can then create a lot of value and a better understanding within the organization also. And a second part about internal collaboration is talking about tech, is about the closeness or the distance between product and public affairs. I personally always think that the closer government affairs and public affairs is to the product or upcoming product changes, the better. But it's also very time consuming and very difficult, right? If you have a very small team, they cannot be present externally and internally at the same time. So later, at some point you will have to face certain trade-offs at that part. But it's important to remember that the disruption in the society is always created by the product itself. And after the disruption, you create impact, and then at some point you create regulatory reaction. That's why the product is so important.
I want to add one more thing that I've seen lately in this startup world, tech companies, and might be something that this cash scarcity has created, and now public affairs and policy are not seen only as or should not be seen only as a area of service of operations. But more and more, the public affairs are now trying to find ways to actually save money and create revenue streams for the companies, right? We have this issue that we have done it all time through a third party. Can we do it, directly to government, and that way we can save that fee and we can cash, we can save that money? Let's find a way. Or I have, you can bring as public affairs some ideas to the, as Jose was saying, the business people. And if that is going to open up a new stream revenue, that's something that it's definitely going to be super appreciated. And as I said, I don't know if this has always been the rule, but now in this context, I'm sure it's becoming more and more relevant.
Thank you for
Amazing.
that.
Thank you.
Do we have any other open questions? If not, we have one in the chat, but feel free, guys. Okay, so I'll just go to the chat. There's a question around early stage startups, and I guess it goes in terms of what would be the first steps to take as an early stage startup to think about public affairs. I don't know if you guys have any advice there, any insight. I know it's a very general question.
I think when you think about an early stage, then the opportunities is much wider to work hand in hand with public affairs, right? When you generate like disruption, where you're trying to generate disruption, you have to think about what are you disrupting, right? You have to think about how's the state of art of any given industry or any given context. So like the first assessments on these for early stage startups are very useful, either to spot risks or seize opportunities that Rodrigo has shared with us. Maybe there are opportunities that you might turn into business opportunities, right? Or as Sig has put down, maybe you can build reputation and save money and save money through marketing campaign. Rather, you go to strategic communication, to strategic stakeholders to widen the audience you want to reach. So early stage startups are important. When you think about the early stage startups, you have to think about the opportunity of engaging with PA from the beginning to create opportunities at the same time of preventing or mitigating risks. I would say that.
Thank you for that, Jose. And I actually have one more question. I'm just curious about like later stage startups. How does public affairs strategy look like globally, right? So is there like a grand strategy in your experience globally that then gets coordinated in or tweaked in different countries differently, or like every country has their own public affairs strategy? I'm just curious about what that might look like.
Yeah, so maybe I can take a hit on that one. I think what becomes increasingly important for global companies and with regards to policy is the role of principles, right? Or certain overarching ideas in terms of what does the company stand for. Like, yeah, more generally, what's the vision with regards to the future regulation of a certain activity or of a certain sector? And it can be helpful in certain occasions to make this vision and those principles visible to the regulators, to the public in general. And of course, those principles need to be globally aligned. Like a global company needs to make sure that in country A, what they tell regulators is actually more or less the same what they tell regulators in country B. But it will be very difficult to have to be advocating for one single regulation, right? That's almost impossible. Regulations are mostly done at a national level, hence they will vary between countries, and even in some cases they will vary within a country and even sometimes within a state. Particularly Mexico, Brazil, the variations of importance of municipalities and cities is enormous. So what global departments then do is really like providing the overall direction and the overall principles, and then the frontline teams, the local teams, make their specific strategies and implement them.
Makes sense. Thank you, Sigfried. Do you have any last takers?
Only if the answer is quick, guys. But I guess like what are some tools that you might use other than social media? I think is the most common one to get a pulse check on what's going on externally with your stakeholders. But any other tools that you would recommend open to the public just to get a pulse check on what other stakeholders might be feeling, sensing about your startup or what you're doing? Any SaaS tools, any suggestions, like practically, other than social media itself?
There come to my mind two things, like the regular media. When you think about the public conversation, you maybe immediately think about social media, but there's a traditional media too, and there are specialized tools to collect, for instance, and systematize all the notes regarding not only you as a company or as a brand, but rather the industry or the problems that you're trying to solve or the issues that you are addressing. And then you have a broad idea on what's the public conversation in the segment that you want to make. For instance, if you're dealing with a food saving startup, then you have to think about different conversations regarding technology, regarding food saving, regarding access to food or new sources of food or food waste, or and then you have to interpret that and create the narrative on the spaces that you live in. Like that's like one tool, and the other would be, just as Rodrigo said, the informal contacts that you might have, and start talking informally to the key stakeholders and knowing what does them think about you, and maybe having intelligence, underground intelligence, that it's so called, the underground intelligence, that you go and say, hey, what do you think about this new enterprise? What are you feeling about that? These informal ways of getting information from key stakeholders is also very important to keep up to speed on what's the environment thinking about you.
Perfect.
Amazing.
So I think that's
Right
a
on
wrap.
time.
Yeah, right on time. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Rodrigo, Sig, Jose. That was super insightful. We have a Landa IRL event coming up, so we might just continue the conversation more in depth there. I think it's a very interesting topic. And but yeah, that's it from our side. We also upload the recording to our YouTube channel. So thank you guys for joining and for being a part of Landa.
Thank
Thank
guys.
you.
Many thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.